sparing the time to come and join us today for our session, particularly looking at clean energy activity and the link to nature. So I'm just going to say first, you'll see on the agenda, we were expecting our global lead for climate energy, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, to be here. He's apologized. He had to leave early this morning, and he's on his plane back to South America. So I have to say thanks very much to my colleague here, our deputy lead for climate and energy, Vanessa Perez, who's agreed to fill in at the last minute. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa for a few words of intro. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for that. And welcome to your Panda Hub. I'm very, very happy to be with you here today because I've been accompanying Dean and other partners in putting this together. And I truly believe it is an innovative and worthwhile undertaking. So we're here today to do mainly two things. The first one is to launch this new coalition linking energy and nature action. It's called Clean Action. And the second one is to share with you some of the initial results of the activities that already we have developed together with partners, and what is the road ahead. So what do we see as the road ahead of this? So first, let me explain why I think this is so important. I think this COP has proven that it is not energy or nature. It is both. We have to, in order to keep the 1.5 degree alive, we need a deep and rapid decarbonization of the energy sector, and we need to invest in both restoration of natural ecosystems as well as halting the drivers of deforestation loss. So that has become clear here. So that means that we should tackle both of them. And what I like about this coalition is that is linking both. So there are definitely synergies when you think about those and you think about them together. So if you think about subsidies, right, and subsidies removal, that's something that will, probably we have to tackle them jointly. There's going to be social impacts of that, and we need to define what that means. But there will also be trade-offs. So that deep decarbonization in the energy sector will imply a rapid ramp-up of renewable energy, and we should make sure that renewable energy is sustainable, and we should make sure that renewable energy is put in the right places, right? And it's developed with the highest social standards, right? So I think that this coalition is going to be very, very relevant as we move forward. And I'm also very happy to see that in this coalition we have partners not only from the NGO sector, but we have partners as well from the industry sector and other partners. And I think that is also an ingredient for credibility. And that's what is being asked on the streets, that we come together with clear action and incredible action. So I hand it over to Dean to tell you more about what we've done so far, but what we also plan to do. And we'll do a formal launch of the coalition in a bit later in the event. Back over to you, Dean.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. Now, I'm always a big fan of audience participation in these events, and I've seen quite a lack of that during the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, if you could just tell me, do you think of yourself as an energy organization or a nature organization, or a bit of both somehow? So can you, if you're an energy organization, just raise your hand if you're involved with that. Okay, so we've got a good collection. And then nature, are you involved with nature activities? So we've got some nature people and some overlap as well. So this is good. So it's a good crowd. All right, so thanks very much for coming. Now, I just want to give you some background to this initiative, where it's come from. So at WWF, we've really put together an action plan for the energy sector activities, just to give us a bit of a focus in terms of what we're doing. Because we've got a lot of offices, which is great. We've got representation in a lot of countries worldwide, and a lot of energy sector activities ongoing in these places. But a lot of it is quite superficial. It's spread quite thinly in different places, and we thought, let's get a focus. Let's try to bring this together so we can have a real impact on the way forward. So what I've done is to try to say we put together 3 main areas of activity. So we're looking at transition from from fossil fuels to renewables, energy access, particularly in developing countries, and energy efficiency, which is increasingly on the agenda again these days. But cutting across all of those areas is this link between energy and nature, which is something in my background is very much the sort of energy sector. And if I'm honest, I hadn't really considered a lot of this previously. And the more I've investigated the situation, I'm aware that a lot of the nature-based organizations do undertake some energy type activity, but most of the energy-based organizations, present company accepted of course, but most of the energy organizations don't really understand what nature is about. What are the issues that we need to address? So when I first arrived at WWF, I came in and said, renewable energy, that's what we should do. It's great, fossil fuel to renewable energy. So I spoke to our freshwater people and I said, hydropower, that's what we should be. And they said, you can't do hydropower, that's terrible. What about the fish? What about run-of-river hydropower? No, it's terrible, the ecosystem, you just ruin that. So I thought, well, what about wind power? Wind power must be, that's effective. They go, well, what about the birds? The migration patterns of the birds, thousands of birds killed every year because of wind power. Solar power must be a good option. Solar power is, everybody supports solar. The food people said, but land use, what about land use? Nutrition, food. You've got to take these things into consideration. So fortunately, we did all agree that renewable energy is better than fossil fuels. Renewable energy is the way to go, but we've got to be careful about how we do that. Where do we site the renewable energy systems, and how do we address the most effective use of the resources that are available? So yes, it's the best approach, but we've got to be aware of minimizing the negative impact. So what we felt at that point is, let's try to bring together the two sides so that energy people do start to understand better the nature issues they need to consider. And that was the basis then for this coalition, launching this, speaking to nature organizations, energy organizations, and we've got now 5 other organizations that have agreed to be founder members, which we'll hear from in a second. So I'd just like to welcome the founder members. Do we have the pictures up there at all? First of all, from the Nature Conservancy, the Director for Development by Design there, I've got to say thanks here. This is Joe Kiesecker, who hopefully will be on the screen at some point. He's had to get up, I think it's 5 o'clock in the morning where he is, so we're very grateful for him to join us. Francesco La Camera from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Organization, representative here, so thanks very much for joining. Kobe Brandt is the Deputy Secretary General from ICLE, the Local Governments for Sustainability Organization. That's 2,500 local government representatives in this area. Tris Allenson, thanks very much, from BirdLife International for joining us. And we also have the CEO, I can see you all now, that's great. CEO from ARA, the Alliance for Rural Electrification, David Lecoq. So thanks very much for joining us all. So we're going to hear from them in a second. Just 1 or 2 other things I wanted to point out about this coalition, because you'll all be aware there are lots of coalitions, and particularly in the last couple of weeks there are more of these things being set up, and you think, well, what is the real benefit of having these organizations? Our intention is not to be a never-ending coalition, but rather to be coming together for perhaps 3 or 4 years to really push this into the agenda, so that energy and nature start to be recognized as something that needs to be addressed together. Now, once we can initiate that, we feel the market will take over, because you'll see what the benefits are. But it needs that push at the moment. So that is the intention. And the other part is that you'll see the founder members are effectively international institutions representing different organizations. But we've recognized we have to bring on board the private sector and financing organisations. So our intention is to establish working groups of private sector actors and of financing organisations as well, so we can bring together the resources. And I'm very pleased to say that we have in our audience some of the private sector organisations that have already seen the opportunity here and are willing to sort of commit to taking forward with us on this journey. So thanks very much for them to bring along. So I'm going to say now, let's talk to our founder members. Once we've had our launch today, we're going to be sitting down and speaking about what are the key priorities for us to take forward in consultation with all the other members, how best to achieve positive results. But part of that process is listening to you. We're not going to dictate what to do without understanding who else, the other stakeholders, other people in the room here and the virtual audience, to come together and give us some direction. But let me first ask then each of the founder members if we could just describe briefly their perspectives. Now, I can see there, that's Joe, I think, looking just about woken up. So thanks, Joe, for joining us at this crazy time in the morning. But let me pass over to you just to hear from the Nature Conservancy what your perspective is on this issue.
Yeah, just about woken up, I should say. Thanks, Dean and the WWF team, for the opportunity to present at what is perhaps the most important meeting of our time. Climate change is clearly the defining issue of the century, and I don't have to look any further than my own family to see its impacts. My sister had to flee her home from wildfires in California, my niece from hurricanes in Puerto Rico, and my brother's home was damaged from Superstorm Sandy. So it's clear that climate change is here now, so we need practical action now. So it's timely to be discussing the challenges to achieving the renewable energy transition. The latter is critical given that somewhere around 75% of our emissions come from energy. So we need a rapid overhaul of our energy system away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. It's really important to stress that while things like natural climate solutions can be incredibly important, we're not going to address climate change and emission reductions without overhauling our energy system. The analogy I like to use is, like the single-use plastics crisis, we're not going to recycle our way out of the problem without reducing use, despite how everyone likes to feel really good about recycling. We've spent a century building an energy system that's based on fossil fuels, and we have around a decade to change that. And we have a lot of renewable energy to build, around 20 to 30 times of our current installed capacity. And the reality is that the leading renewable energy sources, wind and solar, take a lot more space in comparison to fossil fuels. The potential for land use conflicts is very high, and those conflicts may slow the transition. We already see conflicts in the renewable energy that's been built. For example, in one of the places the Conservancy works in India, around 70% of the solar was built on areas important for biodiversity for agriculture. Conflicts over renewable energy and environmental and social issues grace the front pages of newspapers on a regular basis. There are studies that are showing that ignoring these conflicts can result in cancellation, delays, and higher costs, in some cases significant delays and cost overruns. Looking forward, some colleagues and I projected the unintended environmental consequences of the Paris Climate Agreement if it follows the business as usual approach to meeting renewable energy targets. We translated country NDCs into actionable renewable energy targets and placed those footprints on the ground. Like past patterns, we found large impacts to threatened and endangered species, natural land, and areas important for agriculture. But the other half of that same study found that the world has about 17 times the area needed to meet required energy targets on converted lands that also have viable renewable energy. Places like built infrastructure, rooftops, mine sites, other brownfields and industrial areas, as well as agricultural sites where that's appropriate. Most countries, including the top 10 emitters, can meet their renewable energy goals on these lower impact areas. And that's great news, but steering renewable energy towards these lower conflict sites is not going to happen on its own. Right now, when it comes to reducing conflicts and mitigating impacts to biodiversity from development, we spend a disproportionate amount of our time and energy and funding working reactively at the site and project level. We need to shift that to phases that are earlier in the planning process and at larger spatial scales. The conservation community is also really comfortable with telling government and industry where they shouldn't develop, but we need to work cooperatively and use our data and convening power to ID renewable energy go areas if we want to see the rapid transition that's needed. That's exactly what TNC is doing. We're targeting the highest emitting countries, US, China, India, and Europe, building tools that will let government and industry screen projects for risk, and at the same time, use those values that are in those screening processes to design go areas that meet renewable energy targets. Given the scale of the challenge and limited time, we need a new green revolution, an initiative on scale with the green revolution that drove shifts in agriculture, ultimately that synchronizes government, researchers, and civil society. I mean, we need it, we need it now. Let me shut up and say again, thanks for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you all, and thanks again, and I'll kick it back to you, Dean.
That's great. Thanks very much, Joe, for coming on board on this. And very interesting as well for us from an energy angle to see the nature, the conservancy angle of the energy issues. And good that TNC is one of those organisations, nature-based, but has got some capacity there to look at renewable energy activities. So we're learning from them as well. So if you have any questions on any of these issues as the presentation is going through, please just hold on to them and we'll come back in the session at the end. We now have a recording from the Director General of IRENA, who was planning to be here with us, but again had to leave early, so has apologised for that. But very pleased that he managed to put a recording together. So I'll ask our team if we could play that now. Thanks.
Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. And at the outset, allow me to send my special greetings to Manuel. He has been a great COP20 presidency, and all you know that the Sacres of Paris has been started to be built in Lima under his wise chairmanship. And also is my great friend and great human being. A few words on IRENA. The International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, serves as the principal platform for international cooperation. It is a center of excellences, a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. We promote the widespread adoption and sustainable use of all forms of renewable energy in the pursuit of sustainable development, energy access, energy security, and low-carbon economic growth and prosperity. Moreover, we provide the practical tools and policy advice to accelerate renewable energy deployment and facilitate knowledge sharing and technology transfer to provide clean, sustainable energy for the world growing population. When IRENA was created a decade ago, renewable energy was a fringe topic of discussion. Through immense hard work, dedication, and passion for a just future, we have helped move to the energy transition to the center stage. And I'm very glad to have answered again to the call of my friend Pulga Vidal to join the Clean Action Coalition. Personally, I see the decade as the decade of the implementation. Rhetoric and surface level ideological discussion on the climate crisis have reached their end, as have fossil fuels, which only be risky, stranded investment, both now and in the future. Today, it's widely accepted that renewable energy is a cost-effective and sustainable option for our energy future. Renewable energy is becoming even more effective, and just last year, during the pandemic, 80% of all energy addition was renewable. This is a remarkable feat. Even with this being said, IRENA is a pragmatic and forward-looking organization that knows that even with the enormous socioeconomic benefits of renewable energy, there will be an impact on the natural environment. For us, the impact must be transparently declared and monitored. This is why today we decided to join the Clean Action as a founding member, as we know we cannot do this alone. Mitigation and adaptation partners must work hand in hand to ensure that all our future are safeguarded. How do we do this? By incorporating a nature-based approach across every step of the process. For example, site selection for renewable energy deployment must be embedded with a nature-based approach, where financer and developer must be made aware of the environmental impact itself if energy is to be chosen over nature. Moreover, I'm glad to see that the global renewable energy circular economy is forming, one that takes nature into account. As a coalition, we must ensure that the momentum for this is not lost. On the more regional front, there is also a need to recognize that geographically, a different mix of renewables is required depending upon the available local resources. The coalition must be committed to find the best mix of renewable energy under local conditions, taking full account of the likely impact on the natural environment. For ARENA, renewable energy is an enabler for a better and just future, and should be at the center of the nexus between prosperity, people, and planet. The pandemic we are still living in has shown us how we are all interconnected. Nature must be nurtured and protected. That's why I look forward to working with all of our fellow Clean Action members on this important topic. Have a wonderful event, Father, and I hope to see you and in person soon. So ready to work together, my friends, all together. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, I would say thank you very much to Francesco for just setting out the message clearly that ARENA, as a very high-profile energy organization, is very willing and aware of the need to address the nature-based issues. And having them on board with this coalition, I think, is a critical factor. So it's very good news to see that taking ahead. So now I'm going to call on Kobe Brandt, who's the Deputy Secretary General of ICLE. I mentioned the Local Governments for Sustainability Organisation, which, for those that don't know, is a global network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments who are committed to sustainable urban development. So I'm going to pass on to Kobe to give us a few words of the perspective of ICLE. Thanks very much, Kobe, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean. And what a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sitting in Cape Town, but a couple of my colleagues are with you in Glasgow indeed. And we're very, very happy to be a founding member of this Clean Action Coalition. It couldn't have come at a better time. I'd like to start off by emphasizing that the world's urban expansion impacts nature. The climate emergency, loss of biodiversity, and environmental pollution places us, our future, and the welfare of multiple generations in real danger today. This requires proactively protecting and nurturing nature and biodiversity while switching to clean renewable energy to survive and safeguard this planet. We collectively need to redefine as a matter of urgency how nature and energy can indeed come together in a sustainable approach, securing sustainable ecosystem services and energy supplies while ensuring also climate resilience. The transition to a clean renewable energy future has started. We know what to do, and we understand the urgency to accelerate and scale up efforts fast and efficiently. Where we can redirect our efforts now is to focus on local demand and needs-driven approaches for local renewable energy generation and use while embracing nature-based development. Our local and regional governments in our network and beyond have a crucial role to play here. They are developing and implementing integrated and comprehensive plans, ensuring their own operations and the whole territory are climate resilient while protecting people, infrastructure, and nature, diversifying and greening urban spaces that will bring benefits to all. Yes, we also see We also need to raise awareness of citizens, businesses, and industry, but also of energy providers and other utilities that humankind and all forms, in fact, of life depend on biodiversity for their very existence. But most of all, we need leadership at all levels of government that ensures a greener and more sustainable existence of people on this planet by enabling the efficient integration of urban development and biodiversity management at the local level. Clean action will play a key role to bring organizations like us together to co-define and jointly implement immediate practical solutions addressing energy systems and energy use, land use, agriculture and forestry, urban and rural development, as well as infrastructure and lifestyles. Together, we can contribute to the Paris Agreement targets and the SDGs. This requires more ambitious climate and energy commitments at both national and subnational levels with rapid transformation. Demand for metals such as lithium and cobalt for the vast number of batteries required to support renewable energy transition is also set to continue increasing rapidly. Mining of these metals often have negative impacts on biodiversity, water security, and human rights. Subnational government programs to collect and recycle batteries, for example, such as in Malmö and Quebec City, will play an important part in reducing these impacts. In December 2014, the Municipal Council of Recife in Brazil approved the Green Roof Law, a bylaw which requires buildings with more than 4 floors to have their roofs covered with native vegetation. But perhaps one of the most exciting examples is photovoltaics. This is currently in a pilot stage in my city, Cape Town, South Africa, and Orlando in the USA, where solar panels float on the ponds of wastewater treatment plants, which saves land, generates power locally for sewage treatment, and reduces evaporation. Regarding partnership and collaboration, we know through action on the ground, cities can show that they are engines of change and beacons of hope. Since 1991, ICLEI has had an active climate program supporting local governments to tackle climate change, and our work has taken on a new urgency with a renewed focus on building resilience and adaptive capacity at local level through our priorities of low carbon, resilient, and people-centered development. It is for this very reason that we have thrown our full weight behind both the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience initiatives. The Race to Resilience offers a deepening of the work that ICLEI undertakes with other R2R partners such as CDP and WWF, and has provided an opportunity to extend our collaborative efforts. In fact, for the last 2 years, ICLEI, and here in Africa as well, has partnered with WWF to implement the biennial One Planet City Challenge, or OPCC. The OPCC invites cities in participating countries to report ambitious and innovative climate actions and to demonstrate how they are delivering on the Paris Agreement. I would like to end off by very briefly highlighting the link between equitable energy and nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, or NBS, reduce the risks and impacts of climate change with opportunities to support the just energy transition across multiple scales, ensuring it benefits all stakeholders. Based on 10 new insights in climate science, as stated by Johan Rockström at COP26 just last week, we need to understand the regulatory framework for energy-nature nexus advancements and how it permits the intersection of a just energy transition and NBS to be advanced and designed, and ensure that the gap between energy and nature is integrated to the advancement of integrated social and climate action in a just manner. And let's just also say to each other, national governments play a key role in creating the enabling framework conditions to support our local action in our cities. Collaboration, partnerships, and coordinated efforts are therefore needed to move forward rapidly. We are very proud today to join this founding meeting of the Coalition Towards Clean Action. Thank you very much. ICLEI is happy to be here with you.
Thanks very much, Kobe. That's great, and very much appreciate ICLEI coming on board. And for everybody here, I mean, the one reason that we approached ICLEI on this was that I heard that the world is undergoing this dramatic urban expansion, and apparently by the year 2100, 90% of us are going to live in urban areas. So it's actually pretty critical to understand what the factors are, and therefore having ICLEI on board is going to be a big factor for us moving forward. So thanks very much, Kobe, for that. Tris, we need some live action here. So I'm going to hand over to you. So as the Senior Global Science Officer for BirdLife International, please fire away. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dean, and hello, everyone. BirdLife is the largest and oldest partnership for nature in the world. We're a family of 117 national conservation organisations around the world. So here in Scotland, we're represented by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And we support those partners through our offices around the world and our global secretariat based in Cambridge in the UK. And in Cambridge, we're based in the David Attenborough building, which has become a hub for conservationists from the leading UK international and national conservation organisations and scientists. So partnership and collaboration are really at the heart of everything we do at BirdLife. And so on behalf of BirdLife, may I say how excited we are to be joining this initiative. The rapid transition to renewable energy is essential, of course, but it must not be achieved at the expense of nature. The reality is that renewable technologies like wind and solar are space intensive and will require many millions of hectares of land and sea globally. And in turn, this will require that we more than double the amount of power lines in the world. And if this infrastructure is sited inappropriately, there could be significant negative impacts for nature. Perhaps the wildlife group most impacted by renewable energy is birds. Some birds are highly susceptible to collision with power lines and wind farms. Some are even at risk of collision with solar panels. For other species, renewable energy facilities can displace them from their favoured habitats and create barriers to their daily movements and annual migrations. And the consequences can be truly catastrophic. So at BirdLife, we're responsible for assessing the conservation status of the world's birds for the IUCN Red List, and this includes determining when a species has gone extinct. And for some time, my colleagues and I have speculated that perhaps the next global bird extinction would be the result of climate change. However, at present, perhaps the most likely next candidate for extinction is the great Indian bustard, and the reason, collision with power lines associated with wind and solar facilities. It would be truly tragic if before any bird species had succumbed to climate change, a species were to go extinct because of poorly planned renewable energy. And it would also be completely avoidable. The great thing about wind and solar as sources of energy is these are widespread, ubiquitous resources. Much of the Earth's surface is sufficiently windy and sunny to generate energy, and wind farms and solar facilities can be readily integrated into landscapes of low ecological value, such as agricultural and industrial settings. With care and through collaboration, we can ensure that ecologically sensitive locations are avoided. And it's fitting that we're here in Scotland, as it was here that BirdLife's UK partner, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, with Scottish Natural Heritage, now NatureScot, developed the very first map of avian sensitivity to help guide Scotland's fledgling wind energy sector. And that, and many other reasons, key amongst them collaboration, is why Scotland is still regarded today as a great example of how you can achieve a transition to renewable energies and do so in a nature-positive manner. And BirdLife and our partners have since become global experts in mapping avian sensitivity to aid safe siting and energy infrastructure. And we work with the energy sector around the world to ensure these best practices are ensured. One of the ways we do that is through the Conventional Migratory Species Energy Task Force. So back in 2014, those governments who are signatories to the Conventional Migratory Species voted to bring into existence an energy task force that would bring together various stakeholders, the energy sector, governments, and the NGOs, the investor community, to exchange best practice around the transition to renewables. And BirdLife has the role of coordinating that on behalf of the CMS. I sit as chair of the technical working group advising on the science. So again, another example of where collaboration is absolutely key. So meeting our renewable energy targets in a nature-safe way is going to be challenging. But if the energy sector and conservationists work together, a truly green, clean energy transition is possible. And I'm confident that the launch of the Clean Action Initiative will prove to be a pivotal step in making that a reality. So thank you for inviting us to this event. Thank you.
Thanks again, Tris, for coming along to this. And you'll have heard the CMS, the Energy Task Force here, is an excellent effort from BirdLife International to address the sort of issues that we're talking about now. And what we're trying to do through the Clean Action Coalition is to build on this, to broaden it, expand it, so we can bring in place all of the energy organisations that are not involved in that activity at the moment. So thanks very much for coming on board at BirdLife International. So let me move swiftly then to our second sort of energy-based actor in this whole process. And I think we have David Lecoq, who's the CEO of ARA, the Alliance for Rural Electrification, which I was going to explain, but I'll pass this to David so he can tell us all about it and the motivation for coming on board with Clean Action. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Dean, and hello, fellow speakers and participants today. Thank you very much for having us and for inviting us to be part of this indeed very important event. So my name, to recap, is David Lecoq. I work with the Alliance for Rural Electrification. We are an energy-based actor. Essentially, we are the global business association for the distributed renewable energy industry, which catalyzes private sector-driven markets for sustainable electricity services, creating jobs and powering the equitable economies, as our mission statement has it. So typically, we will federate now almost 200 mostly private sector companies, as well as a few associate members, all of which are working to install standalone or mini-grid type solutions in the rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, Caribbean. From our point of view, as we approach the dangerous tipping points in our climate system, the countries where we operate face the challenge of building back better or building back the way that it was before, which would then not have all the best consequences. So now we are working very hard, and myself, I was in Glasgow also last week precisely for that purpose, to motivate countries to choose sustainable pathways forward, to future-proof their economies, to deliver what is essential is also clean energy access, but to do that in, and I like the speaker from BirdLife saying the nature positive way. I think that is an excellent way of putting it. So we are really proud to represent this industry that is by definition a natural industry. I mean, renewable energy harnesses precisely the forces of nature to deliver a service, and that service has tremendous potential to power, as I said, communities, to power a local sustainable economic development, as well as to do that in a way that is in a nature-based approach. Specifically for distributed renewables, they are considered to be, or estimated to be, the least cost electrification option for more than half of all new connections needed for the remaining 800 million or so people in the world that do not have electricity still in 2021. And it has also been found to be actually the smartest way to address climate change in an environmental and in a nature-friendly manner. Because by replacing the outdated technology, often it will be a huge sort of centralized infrastructure or coal plants or diesel generators at a smaller level. We replace that with, in the brownfield context, or we build new infrastructure in a greenfield context with renewable, efficient, smart, and high quality electricity systems. We think that distributed renewables are the key to power green sectors and green sectors, such as agriculture, such as telecoms, mining, tourism, you name it. All of which right now can definitely benefit from a more green and a more reliable and cheaper electricity supply. We note also, on the other hand, that today almost 70% of the loss of wildlife that the world has experienced is in the last 50 years. So that means, as one of the earlier speakers, that there is this ecological crisis that is happening, the climate change crisis. All of it is coming together in a perfect storm. So here for us, I think as an representative of an industry that has, of course, just a tiny fraction compared to fossil fuels or large installations, but still has an impact on nature, wherever we build systems, whether it's small hydropower, run-of-river, whether it's solar, whether it's bioenergy powered systems. That is really why we are in the Clean Action Network, that we are so proud to be a founding member on the invitation of WWF, to really think how we can embed these nature considerations, which are admittedly not always on the top of the list, because in our sector of energy, actually, we always think we need to build and deliver connections now, because people are living in energy poverty, and we need to do that sustainably. I think we can do better as an industry, and we can do better still as an energy sector, certainly overall. And so that's why we are very proud to be in this network, and that's why we are looking forward to constructively think together with the different respected partners on this panel and more on how we can really do it practically, and how we can do it also quickly. Because I think Mr. Joe Kiesecker mentioned, it's not like we have another century to transform our power system. It needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. So, well, I'll stop there, and thank you so much for giving us the floor and the possibility to be here, Din, and looking forward to a strong collaboration on the Clean Action Network.
So thanks very much, David. I appreciate you coming on board with this. Appreciate all of the members. So you've heard from all 6 of us launching the coalition linking energy and nature for action, and we're going to come on to the action version. But before I ask Vanessa to sort of formally launch the coalition, I want to throw this open to you here in the room, and my colleague here, James, who's monitoring our sort of virtual audience with the questions coming through there as well. I know there are 1 or 2 private sector organisations in the audience who have already said to me they're very interested to come on board with this activity in the form of the private sector working group, which we're hoping to establish as being a critical part of this. So I'm going to ask you, you both, you're gazing at me, so I'm going to go for, which one first? Let me go on this side. Please could you come in and let us know from Ørsted perspective.
Is that on? Okay. Thank
please,
you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today.
Is the mic on okay?
I speak here?
That's
yes.
Perfect, you've got it.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here today at the launch of the Clean Action Coalition. So Ørsted is a global leader in offshore wind, and we currently supply power to over 15 million people. Closer, okay. And at Ørsted, we recognise the need for the build-out of renewable energy to happen in a sustainable way. And today, as the world necessarily moves to build unprecedented new renewable energy infrastructure, we know that a sustainable energy company can only mean one that makes positive contribution to both the climate and ecological crises. We are proud of our standing as the world's most sustainable energy company, and we want to build on this now by using our experience to deliver the industry-leading goal of transforming all renewable energy projects into renewable energy projects that create net positive impact for biodiversity. We've already started, and our goal is to guarantee this for every new asset we commission by 2030 at the very latest. But this is bigger than Ørsted, and it's new territory for all of us involved in delivering the green energy transition. That's why Ørsted is also committed to playing our role in accelerating the international debate and collaboration needed to bring about a global step change in how we think about the integration of climate and biodiversity goals and plans to meet them. We'd be incredibly excited to play a leading role in the private sector working group of the Coalition Linking Energy and Nature for Action. It's hugely important work and a much needed forum. And we know many others in the energy sector are also working hard on this, and there are key challenges that can only be solved together, sharing evidence and good practice to deliver solutions that the scientific community can stand behind. And of course, to come together to amplify our message on the criticality of including nature in the pathway to net zero, to ensuring a fair, equitable and sustainable energy transition, one that enables the huge power of nature to be part of the solution to the crisis we face. Both renewable energy and biodiversity are critical to the future life on Earth. The global green energy transition must be delivered in harmony with nature, and we look forward to working together on this. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, man. And it's great to hear from you coming on. I know our discussions have been quite recent with the private sector, and great to see you coming on board with us for that. And in saying that, I'm going to come over to other great contacts here in a similar vein from Scottish Power here in Glasgow, but obviously with broader connections to Iberdrola. But please, let me pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Dean. I'm Lindsay McQuaid. I'm the Chief Executive of Scottish Power Renewables. So as you say, our locus of operation is very much where COP's happening. And just like Jane's commented, I think very much nature and support of positive biodiversity impact is very much our modus. We have 40 wind farms, including 2 offshore, operating across the country, and we're also part of the Iberdrola group of companies, the 3rd largest utility in the world. And probably quite surprisingly, we were one of the first utilities to move towards having carbon neutral targets for 2030 in Europe and globally by 2050. And that's something that we take very seriously, including how we develop our assets. So I think for us, when we're looking at taking forward new plans, it's about avoidance primarily, then reduction of impact before we even get to mitigation, and how we approach each of our plans, each of our power plants, which we want to make sure will have a positive net impact on biodiversity as well. And I think what's pleasing to me is hearing the panel talk about the need for renewable energy, but in parallel also understanding the impact on nature and how it could actually have a positive impact. I think that that's something that at Scottish Power we can absolutely share our knowledge on, and also very much look forward to being part of the private sector utility working groups. We would be delighted to share our experience in terms of peatland restoration, heathland restoration, and other participatory groups that we've been part of. I think that in the energy sector, principally the renewable energy sector, there is a long tradition of working collaboratively with government and NGOs, and that's something that I think can be emulated on a global basis. So delighted to be part of this event today, and to talk about how we can share that knowledge and approach with others. So great to be here. Thank you.
That's great, Lindsay. Thanks very much. And we do appreciate you taking this up at such short notice, really. So very grateful to Scottish Power, to Ørsted, for being with us. I think, James, on virtual audience, I think we've also got some other potential collaborators who have commented. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, we have a statement from Enel, and it says that Enel confirms that they're interested in deepening the topic. Another statement from Vattenfall, and they say that they are interested in the topic, and they find the topic very urgent to collaborate on.
Great. So we've got others, and I can say as well, at the risk of upsetting Scottish Power entirely, but speaking to SSE, the other utility in Scotland, have also expressed interest in this area, but they're not here today, so I think Scottish Power are one up in that sense. But SSE have been very interested as well, so we'll obviously try to look at that and broaden the scope of this private sector working group so we can all share the relevant experience. Anybody else got any question for our... Yes, James, we've got one more on there.
Yes, another question has come in from Christiana from Enel. And the question is, I understand you want to integrate the business perspective to build a common roadmap to discuss with all relevant stakeholders. What are you planning to be the first steps of the coalition?
So is that to address to anybody in particular, or that's just a general statement?
I think it's a question to the coalition, to you indirectly. Okay. You could answer that, yeah.
Okay, so let me try to pass that on to colleagues here. I think, Joe, did you hear that? I mean, from the TNC perspective, what was your impression? Is Joe still there? Otherwise, I'll pass it to Tris because he's next to me.
Well, can you hear me? I see people's on the virtual meeting shaking. You can hear, okay. I mean, I guess for me, the first place to start off is from a real world perspective. I think there's enough theory around what we need to do, but we need to translate some of that theory into practical action. So I would say to dive into a handful of pilot locations and really use those as launching points for understanding what the initiative will work on and what it will do. And use that as an opportunity then when we have a handful of pilot projects to distill out principles, learnings, and things then that could be replicated more broadly. So start from place, I think would be my, my want and desire for this work.
No, thanks very much. That's great, the response on that. I think we may have one or two other questions which I'm going to come back to, but I am aware that Vanessa is going to have to leave us at sometime shortly. So I'm going to ask her then just to give us the formal launch of the Clean Action activity.
So thanking on the one hand side the industry and other potential partners that have shown interest in this, which actually makes it the most relevant, having that diversity of partners. On behalf of BirdLife International, ARENA, ICLEI, the Nature Conservancy, and the Alliance for Rural Electrification, I formally launch the coalition linking energy and nature for action, Clean Action, today at COP26. Thank you so much.
So we have to remember this time and place because it's going to be important in the future. We'll know you were there. All right, so I'm conscious now that we're a little behind time. I think my team's telling me here to speed up. And we're going to pass over in a second to our collaborators, the Biodiversity Consultancy in the UK. Just to give you a little bit of background before we pass over, you've seen the title that we've said, the Coalition Linking Energy and Nature. But we've also added for action, because we don't want a coalition, we don't want to be talking to each other and having more reports. Reports are important, we need the reports, we need assessment, but we also need to build on that and to take some real action to make things happen. So the aim of Clean Action is to help the world to dramatically increase the installation of renewable energy systems, but in a way that takes full account of the potential impact on the natural environment. Now, we want to work quickly to make sure that this energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables is going to achieve a net zero outcome, but it is done in a way that in fact can be nature positive. So at the moment we've got a way to go on this, but there are opportunities. Now, to decide where best to locate new renewable energy systems, we need to know what are the options in terms of siting these systems. So we thought a useful starting point is to work out how best we can use the renewable energy sources that the planet has available. To look at this, we asked, as I said, our team, the Biodiversity Consultancy, to work with us to find the best places for renewable energy across the world. Now, as you can imagine, this raises many issues, not just related to the physical resources available, but also the political, economic, and social environments concerned. So we haven't finished this process yet, but we wanted to sort of present some of the initial results. So I've asked TBC to come here and just give us an idea of what they've found so far, with the aim to ask you for input and ideas about how we can build upon this work. So this is the first phase. We need to know what issues you think need to be taken into account. So please think about this and let's discuss it. Any issues that you'd like to raise after this introduction from TBC, who are going to tell us what they've got to date. So I'd just like to introduce then Leon Benham, who's the Chief Scientist at the Biodiversity Consultancy. Leon, can you hear us?
I can, thank you. Thanks very much, Dean. I can't hear you now, but I assume it's fine to continue. Thanks. So we seem to have a slight.
That's okay. I'm back here. I think it was my mic. No, please, over to you, Leon. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Dean, and thanks everybody. So let me see if I can share my screen to bring up the slides. hope those are visible now. So
yeah, we've got them. Thanks.
It's really exciting to see this coalition taking shape. And as you've already heard from all the contributions today, there's been a lot of research and thinking already on how we can achieve climate goals while also protecting and restoring nature. So we've been supporting as TBC, WWF, and now this new coalition to pull together some of the information that already exists on this and synthesize that and interpret it, and also start a new spatial analysis, which I'll tell you more about in a little while. This presentation is just a very high-level look at some of the synthesis we've come up with so far, where it points, and also explaining what we're hoping to do in the near future with the analysis that's underway. So you've heard already about the renewables imperative, that we really have to have this rapid transition to electrification based on renewable energy in order to combat climate change and maintain a healthy planet. There's various predictions out there, but using the World Energy Outlook with an IEA's pathway to net zero 2050, the predictions are that we should have electricity generated by renewables comprising about 90% of the total by 2050, and predominantly from wind and solar. For that to work, it has to be coupled with increased energy efficiencies, although we will see increased demand globally, especially as developing countries start to provide energy to their populations. We need to try to manage that demand down wherever possible to make the whole approach more sustainable. Renewables have a huge amount of potential to help with climate change, but as we've already heard today, there's also potential for unintended consequences if it's not carefully managed. So we expect that solar photovoltaic in particular and wind will make a much greater share of the total, and that total itself is going to be bigger, 2050, by at least 60%. So that means that in effect that wind and solar and in installed capacity needs to quadruple in the coming decade from what the present levels are, which is quite a practical challenge. Not ignoring other forms of renewable energy like bioenergy and hydro, for example, but they're predicted to make up a smaller share. As we'll see, they also have potentially more problems from the nature positive point of view. That requires quite a lot of space. So although it's a small percentage of the total global land area, probably less than 1%, very much less than 1%, it's still going to be in the region likely of 500,000 to 1 million kilometers squared in terms of the overall perimeter of these installations. That's roughly the size of 1 or 2 mid-sized African countries like Kenya, or twice the US state of Texas in area, so it's not insignificant. And importantly, it also means a major increase in demand for some of the key materials. So as well as the rare earth elements, we expect to see a massive increase in demand for elements like lithium, graphite, cobalt, and nickel, which have to come from somewhere. That will also potentially create impacts. So those impacts need to be managed well in order not to undermine both the climate goals, because nature loss impacts climate, and biodiversity goals as well. And that means, as we heard from some of the contributors already today, trying to avoid converting natural habitat and impacting threatened species. There are effective approaches to mitigation. They're well established for mining. They're improving for renewable energies as well, but they need to be applied, and not just as an afterthought, but as part of the planning process from the earliest stage, integrated into the thinking. Just to stress again that a successful energy transition must account for nature because of the way that nature and climate are closely intertwined. And that's acknowledged in both the two key conventions. The text in the middle is from the current draft COP26 text. It may have changed by now. I'm not sure what the negotiations are coming up with today, but it's strengthened from the Paris Agreement in terms of acknowledging the importance of natural ecosystems in the climate equation. And you heard from Joe Kisek already this morning that not considering nature, if you just want to go and choose the best resources without any other considerations, could actually be very negative for both climate and nature, releasing approximately 9% of the carbon reduction targets in the Paris Agreement if we don't do things properly. There's quite a lot to play for. It's not that easy to compare the impacts of different energy sources for various reasons. The fairest approach is to use an overall life cycle assessment or analysis that looks at everything from the start to the finish. And we've also done some looking at the key impacts from different sources and the potential to address those, and also to see whether we can incorporate native positive elements in these developments. What we see for renewables, leaving aside fossil fuels and the existing energy approaches, which are generally bad for both climate and nature, you can see that while both solar and wind have got impacts, they're quite significantly smaller than for either hydropower or bioenergy. Again, this is an average picture. Individual developments will have their own particular context. But bioenergy tends to take up large amounts of land, which is always a challenge. And hydropower has many ramifying impacts on aquatic systems up and down the rivers that it sits on, which can be quite hard to mitigate. There's also much more potential because of the way that they're laid out, especially when these developments are placed on degraded lands, to try and use wind and solar to actually improve nature in the surrounds and the matrix of the developments themselves. They have got some potential positive elements there as well. And importantly, wind and solar are also the resources which have the most widespread availability and the most options to avoid sensitive areas in their locations. So the key aim here is obviously to try to achieve a range of development goals at once without undermining any of them. And there can be both win-wins and trade-offs involved. The important thing is to be explicit about both these elements and try and focus on the win-wins where possible. Just a few examples here, which I won't go into in detail, for a range of different goals that are relevant here. An interesting study recently showing that hydro in the US, which is, as I mentioned, quite a major impact on aquatic systems, if you use the area that's covered by hydro dams at the moment, you could generate almost 3.5 times existing power output using solar. You could, of course, also float solar panels on the reservoirs, another option to improve the energy generation from these sites. Thinking about how you can share energy between countries and regions can also really improve the options for siting things in the right place and reducing the need for damaging developments. There's an example from Southeast Asia there. And then the last example at the bottom, just generally showing the importance and the value of maintaining natural ecosystems, both for climate and for people, and why we want to try and avoid renewables damaging these for many different reasons. So where to put these developments? Well, there's a lot of potential out there. This is a map from the recent Carbon Tracker report, just looking at what land area you'd need if you were only using solar to meet current energy demands. Obviously, the sunnier parts of the world do better. They also, at the moment, have rather lower energy demands per capita than elsewhere. But the point is that there is a lot of potential out there. This obviously isn't a realistic map. It's not how it would pan out in practice for a number of reasons, but it shows that you can use that resource to generate a large amount of power without using up too much land area, but you need to try and avoid putting things in the sensitive places. Going back to the work that Joe mentioned this morning already, we can see that with poor planning, there's a serious risk to nature if you just go for where the resources are best, rather than where the resources are good and the sensitivity is low. And that could impact a lot of natural habitat and a lot of sensitive sites and species. On the counter side of that, there's also a lot of potential on existing converted lands to meet energy targets across the entire globe pretty well. Now, of course, lands are converted, not empty necessarily. They might be being used for agriculture or for other things that are also important. You also obviously have to balance off all the social and livelihoods and rights issues as well, as we heard already today. But it does show that with careful planning, we don't need necessarily to intrude on nature in order to meet these goals. A really important tool here is going to be integrated land use and marine planning, which could include strategic environmental assessment. It often builds on sensitivity mapping that Tris mentioned already today, looking at where the places are that are most sensitive for species on the ground or in the air or both, and then building on that to incorporate social, economic, technical considerations to work out your land use plans. If that's done at an early stage, then it guides developers to the right places, as Joe was also mentioning, so we can find places that are the best trade-off between resources and other costs, and make sure that our renewables are put in places that are going to have the least negative and the most positive impacts. So we're building on the existing analysis that are out there with the spatial analysis, which the WWF spatial team is working on at the moment, using the Net Zero 2050 pathway forecast and looking at the wind and solar elements, which are the ones with the most potential to scale up and the likeliest increase in area over the next little while. We're taking a regional approach to start with, so assuming that there will be transboundary power sharing within regions, and we may tune that further later on to see what the implications will be if that's more or less the case. And again, to start with, just looking at 3 simple scenarios. So focusing on the best energy resource, focusing on avoiding protected areas and key biodiversity areas, the most important places for biodiversity on the planet, and then avoiding protected areas and KBAs, and also other zones of high natural intactness and species sensitivity. And those outputs, which will be for offshore as well as for onshore, and looking at the balance of wind and solar as well, will give us some regional quantification of potential biodiversity impacts in different approaches, and what the costs and trade-offs might be if we try and avoid biodiversity impacts. Because if we're looking for going to resources that are slightly less good, it means there will be need probably for more infrastructure to meet the same targets, and that will also have more impacts via materials. So it's looking at how that trade-off matches up and see what the overall picture looks like, and then how we can refine that further to provide some general guidance as to what the best approaches are. And that's underway at the moment. So looking at some of these more general issues again, we heard just now about a number of evolving opportunities. So this whole area is rapidly changing. Technology is advancing very fast. Thinking actions advancing very fast. We have a number of emerging technologies coming into use, including floating solar and floating wind offshore, which could make a very big contribution. Linked technologies like green hydrogen, which at the moment are still rather embryonic, but have great potential to use this electricity to do other useful knocking back of climate change and carbon emissions. Decentralization, which we heard about a bit as well, so mini grids and household solutions, which can actually make a very big contribution to meeting SDG 7, but also help us to reduce the overall impacts of upping electrification. Energy sharing, because that gives us much more option to put things in the right place. There's obviously issues around energy security, etc., and also the costs and impacts of building lots of new transmission lines. But this potentially is a very, very valuable way to optimize the approach. And last but definitely not least, the need and desire and increasing effort to improve the circular economy so that we try and reduce this need for new materials and actually use what's already there in the existing installations. There will be need for more mining because it's going to grow, but we can do a much better job about using what's already there and trying to avoid those impacts of extraction. What are the enabling conditions to make this happen? There's a big role for the banks and other investors. WWF and TBC published a report on the public development bank's role in this earlier this year. There are good standards out there that can be adopted by more people and implemented better. There's need for finance to align with global and national targets, and we can see a lot of movement in that direction already with many good initiatives, including the new task force, nature-related financial disclosures. And then the need in the longer term to contribute to nature positive outcomes so that you're trying to get an overall nature positive portfolio rather than just seeing nature and biodiversity as a bolt-on issue to address separately. And again, as we heard today, there's a big role for regulators and national governments in trying to facilitate all this, both in terms of improving regulation, but also trying to ensure that the nationally determined contributions or the goals for biodiversity and climate are actually integrated and aligned. They don't pull in different directions. And also promoting this integrated land use and marine planning based on sensitivity analysis, which is largely a role for government with support from others. If we want to wrap this up in the context of the mitigation hierarchy, this is the extended version that is now being increasingly used with the transform element at the end. There's need to avoid impacts by doing this planning and finding the right sites, and also making sure that industry is committed to avoid developments in protected areas and other sensitive locations. There's need to reduce the impacts both by reducing the materials need and to optimize energy solutions that can minimize further harm to nature and mitigate the impacts at particular sites. So trying, for example, to use shutdown on demand if there is a serious problem with potential collisions with birds. Restoring and regenerating, setting up nature-based solutions, and also using where we can the developments themselves to try to restore and improve nature where there is a lot of potential. And then at the grander scale, all working together to transform the frameworks that govern and drive this, to make sure that we have the true environmental and climate costs reflected, and that we have some other key things in place, like traceability of metals and other materials across supply chains. Finally, just to show how this might map out as a timetable of action against the WWF graph for turning around, bending the curve towards nature positive. And the key things here are actions for the public sector in terms of the targets, the regulatory schemes, and actually applying the regulations. And for the private sector business in developing their policies to align with those approaches and building in the key safeguards, planning how they're going to do their work to align with these national and regional targets, and stepping up to the plate to contribute towards the bigger goal of restoring nature in the next few decades, alongside all the other activities we're doing to combat climate. So a lot of information and ideas there, building on what was said already today. As Dee mentioned, this is very much a work in progress, and we're looking for input to guide how it shapes up, so it can be the most useful for the coalition and its action agenda. I really welcome any questions or inputs from all the participants. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leon, for giving us that background. And I hope everybody can see from this, it's a detailed assessment that we need on all these areas to be able to take some of these things forward in a way that we can be confident we're not going to disrupt the nature elements when we're trying to look at new energy supplies. Now, I should underline that we know there's a wide range of issues that need to be addressed to make sure that we use the available renewable energy resources in a way that has a positive impact on nature. And I love that last slide. That's one of the first things I saw at WWF is down, 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 but we can turn it around, you know, and there can be a positive future, and that's what we need to be aiming at. But this is obviously very much a first step. I mean, this report we've done, this is, that TBC are going to complete for us in the next few weeks, and we hope that can provide a good foundation for clean action to build on. But I'm very interested now to hear your thoughts, your comments, any experience that you've had or issues you think should be raised as part of priorities for the Clean Action Coalition to be taking into account as we try to move this forward. So there's the panel, I think, is still all there, hopefully. And Leon, the presenter from TBC, any issues that you would like to bring up, or any comments, anything you've got on that? I've got one here, Lindsay, and at the back as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Dean. Leon, thank you for your presentation and your overview of the various technologies. I guess sitting with understanding my portfolio and where I'm investing, and your comments with regard to rare minerals and their use, I'd be interested to see your ranking of energy storage options as well as energy generation options from a kind of optimization perspective, and how we can minimize and ensure minimal or avoid impacts adverse to nature as well.
Okay, Leon, do you want to come back on that one?
Obviously a really important question, which we haven't yet incorporated in the analysis directly, partly because there are a number of different options out there and it's not clear which ones are going to be adopted and to what scale. I did mention green hydrogen probably as the only thing in that talk. There is likely to be a very significant demand for batteries, of course, and that is also likely to drive mineral extraction expansion substantially. So I think there is a really big challenge overall in how we manage those mining impacts. That's not insuperable because there are good approaches to managing and mitigating impacts from mines, but it does need really careful handling. I think this is a very big policy question for government as well. So how can we develop the most effective storage approaches to try to minimize the need for a really enormous ramping up in mineral extraction? And there definitely are, I think, some really interesting looking technical solutions out there. They all seem to be at the stage of not being quite scalable yet. So it's how do you take them now to scale, what will the decision as to which ones to move forward with. And that's something that does need government to lead on, I think, obviously with the best technical advice that's out there.
That's great, thanks. I mean, I think the point there is it is an issue which needs to be raised, and great to have you guys on board so we can then try to drive it forward in this direction. So we have a question at the back. Could we ask that one? Thanks.
Thank you. My question actually builds on that last one because I wanted to highlight the growing link between the demand, the likely growth in demand for minerals and metals in particular, and the likelihood that those are going to be sourced from the deep sea. And I'm wondering about the coalition's position on how we sort of navigate that tricky balance between the growth of green tech and the possible sourcing of those minerals from the deep sea, and particularly in light of the criticism the International Seabed Authority are receiving about essentially being poacher and gamekeeper in the management of the licenses for deep sea mining.
I think that's a great question, and certainly at WWF we have a unit set up on deep sea mining in particular to look at these issues, which I hadn't, again from the energy perspective, I really hadn't thought about in this context. Now I do think at the recent IUCN conference there was an agreement for a moratorium on deep sea bed mining, so which is a useful step. So it gives us a little bit of time, but we have got to get a very clear position on how we take this forward. But I'd like just to throw that open a little bit to some of the nature colleagues, and also perhaps to Ara from a business point of view. Is this actually a consideration? But let me bring back in Joe. Do you have any thoughts on this, Joe? I mean, is TNC looking at deep sea bed mining respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach is to look at renewable energy in a comprehensive manner. And I think the sort of what Leon laid out is really comparing across the board with different renewable energy types and a full life cycle assessment. So we really understand what's good, what's bad, what's ugly. The other thing I think we're really pushing and advocating for is, if there's an individual project that's built, wind, solar, whatever it is to really not divorce the upstream mineral needs and other impacts from that project, so that the decision on to build a particular kind of renewable energy project considers some of those broader, larger scale impacts. It's good. I will second what everyone has said. It's going to be a tremendous issue, particularly the needs for minerals, and very difficult and challenging.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. And David, I mean, I'm just very intrigued at your position on this. I mean, is the sort of the minerals issue something that the renewable energy, the members of your network, do they take that into account at all? Is that something they consider, the deep seabed mining disruption that could be resulting from particularly wind power, I think, is the issue?
Thank you, Dean. And indeed, I think it's, first of all, let me preface this by saying I think that's precisely the network that we are setting up and launching today is precisely the sort of place where we can discuss any of these issues. To be frank, deep sea mining is a little bit far removed from our daily reality as being the Organization for Distributed Renewable Energy, so for energy access in developing countries, where the priority is always the electrification through sustainable energy of the population, together with the respect for nature, but also respect for pretty much all the other considerations, right? The need for sustainable development and so on. So for me, that's really the point of this cooperation, to see concretely and in the short term what we can do to improve, to optimize these approaches, to embed that nature-based solution, to become nature positive, to be respectful of the biodiversity and so on. When it comes to the large utility installations, the large wind installations, I think it's better you ask that sector, let's say. But here, still, I think the coalition is the right place to discuss this sort of issues. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, David. If any of the other panelists want to come in at any point, please just wave at me. Otherwise, I'm going to go to our virtual audience. I think, James, you've got one or two questions. Oh, is somebody waving? Kobe, can you, yeah, please.
Yes, I just quickly want to say that this is actually, I completely agree. This is why this coalition is so important, because we've got to put our collective brain power behind this. But I want to just put for a moment my global biodiversity hat on. And, if I recall, just what happened in my country, South Africa, with the best of intentions and the best science available at the time, a lot of scientists brought certain tree species from Australia into South Africa to stabilize large parts of our coastal dune systems. And these became really invasive species, which we will never get rid of in South Africa. And there are such many examples where, with the best of intentions, sometimes we do the wrong things. And I think, the precautionary principle is very key, but the whole issue of soil and minerals and the integrity of soil linked to food production, all those things, they are not easy. They're very, very complex problems to solve. And I think one needs to weigh up, and as Leon said, look at the full spectrum. And Joe also alluded to, looking at the total consequence of an action before it is put forward as a best practice. But certainly this is why I think we are coming together. This is why we need this coming together through this coalition for action.
Thanks very much, Kobe. And I should say this is the first time that, in fact, all of the members of the coalition have come together. So it's great to see this common message filtering through on that. So thanks very much, everybody, for the contributions. James, you're waving at me madly, saying there's lots of virtual questions out there. So please give me an idea.
Many questions, but there's an interesting question and statement from a virtual participant from India, who says she's a scientist from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in the government of India, who says that individual biogas plants at farmers' homes are a very effective solution for methane emissions, and that India has to date installed up to 5 million biogas power plants. And the question is, why is biogas and other bioenergy that has become so famous, like solar and waste to energy, as well as decentralized energy solutions that can handle diverse waste materials and help in reducing carbon emissions? She adds that we can recommend from this platform that bioenergy is a very important source which can provide decentralized power needs and waste management and, of course, income. And that we should recommend that biogas is a recommended option for industrial and big industrial applications, and also put this under considerations, especially for developing countries. And she says that she's willing to be part of this platform and to provide collaboration as a scientist from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in the government of India, and she has left her email address as well. Okay. I'll pass it on in case there's interest. Okay. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's great to hear from people coming back on that, but it does raise a significant issue as well. And I'd be interested to get sort of private sector perspective on this, but I was just discussing with my director before coming in this morning. What is our position on bioenergy at WWF? Because we have some people who are quite positive supporters of the options for bioenergy, but clearly there's a big downside from a nature perspective as well. And so we have to tread very, very carefully on this issue. Does anybody want to come in on the panel on the bioenergy question? Yeah, David, please.
I'm always happy to give my 2 cents, Dean, you know that. Look, I think it's this kind of things, it's never a black and white question. I mean, biomass, biogasification have tremendous upsides, but if done in the wrong way, they also have huge downsides. The point cannot be to cut down forests in one part of the world heat up homes in under that doesn't make that much sense. But where an example that we see a lot working in the field in Africa, for example, it's you see dairy farms, for example, with or other farms that have agricultural waste products. That there are companies they are then providing a gasification solution, because right now in some countries there's actually you hear all sorts of stories that even to dispose of the agricultural waste, that there is even kerosene being thrown on them, lit on fire, and the thing, just to get rid of the waste. That's also not the kind of solution that we want. So rather, what are we trying to, or where, at least in my opinion, bioenergy, including certainly biogasification, is useful, is where we can take, say, a waste stream that is there anyway, such as from agriculture, and find a way to do that in the most nature positive way, to turn that into a useful resource. Pretty much the same argument as you have for recycling, and turning it again into a resource that goes back into the use. Because that's, I think, also the thing about energy is that, and certainly in the context of energy poverty, people will be electrified. That is not the question. The question is, how will they be electrified? Right, and so for that we need to have all the best possible technologies with the least impacts. And actually, we always put it in a negative context. But I like to believe that between the renewable energy side and the nature advocates, that we can. I mean, we are both on the same side of the table, so we can definitely come to a very positive sort of outcome. Yeah. But again, I overtook my time, so back to you.
That's great. Thanks very much for the input. And I think this raises all of the issues. I can see this is going to be one of the first things on our agenda when we all get together to discuss the focus. So useful to consider this. I mean, Tris, from the BirdLife International perspective, bioenergy, has that been something that you've looked at?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely right. It's not black and white, and these things things encompass a huge range of different scales and ways of doing things. And they're it's true to say that there are some bioenergy and biofuels that have some really very significant negative consequences. I think part of the exciting thing about renewable energy is that we do have this diverse range of technologies at our disposal. There's a lot of flexibility there. So, wind and solar, not only is there, a lot of potential in terms of how widely distributed these resources are, there's lots of different scales at which you can do these activities. There's lots of different opportunities, lots of different mixes. So I don't think anything is outside of that mix. I think when we look at the projections and where most of our renewables are coming from, you are starting to see people coalesce on the idea that most of the global growth will come from wind and PV solar. And I think we have to, and that probably makes sense. And they will be the two technologies we have to focus most on. But I think, it's all about actually understanding the right mix and continuing to understand how these technologies can be adapted. There's some interesting research going on in Cambridge by scientists looking at solar facilities, how they can be adapted so they continue to let through enough light to enable crops to grow beneath them, so that you can actually have the same yields of crops and still have solar on top of them. So we're still, not at the final kind of technological solutions in any way. So nothing should be ruled out. But I think we probably are going to see an energy future that is based on wind and solar to a very large extent.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. See, we're running out of time, so I just want to say to everybody, thanks for joining us physically, and all those in a virtual sense as well. We appreciate it. Hopefully this is the starting point of something which will grow into something very significant, so that we can have a real impact over the next few years. We've made a note of all of the issues we've raised today. We're going to try to decide what the focus should be for this this coalition moving forwards, and coming together to work out how best we can have that influence. I should say as well that the coalition is open for new members. So any contacts that you have, anybody out there virtually, if you're interested to learn more, please just send an email. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's my email. So if you just send to dcooper@wwf.no, that will reach me and I will direct it in the right way. And hopefully we can form a nice membership organisation of people and organisations that are aware of the need to address energy and nature together. Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate it, and look forward to the future. Thank you. Bye then.